please get ready to listen in and learn so much more about customer advocacy, how to use your NPS score, and how to really harness your brand ambassadors, your customers, for the betterment of your organization. We'll go ahead here and make sure that we have our friends joining us from our Facebook and LinkedIn audiences. So give us one moment while we get that pulled up here as well. Kathy and Patrick, I hope you're ready to go here. So let's go ahead and get started. So again, welcome everyone for joining us on today's Business as Unusual webinar, where we are speaking with badass industry leaders who are helping us survive and thrive in today's economic climate. My name is Lisa Baining. I'm an account director at Red Caffeine, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. We are so excited to have Kathy Steele, CEO of Red Caffeine, as well as Patrick Rooney, CEO at Echo, joining us for today's session. Now, if you haven't met Patrick, one of the things that you should know about him is he's a constant innovator. And when you think through things, he really focuses on business transformation, how to capitalize market opportunities, and how to scale companies. So we're going to cover that all in today's webinar as we dive into the Holy Grail, which is how to harness your customers and their brand advocacy the best for your business. So some of the key themes you're going to be hearing during today's webinar is what defines customer advocacy? What is the difference between an advisory board versus a roundtable? And also, what do you do with that NPS score, your net promoter score? There's so many intricacies to having a great customer experience and harnessing the value of your customers and how they're saying things. So we're excited to have Patrick dive into those with us today. We also want to give a shout out to all of our $20 Grubhub gift card winners. So the first 5 people who register for any of our Business as Unusual webinars receive a voucher from us to support one of their local restaurants in their area. As we continue to go through the 2019, 2020, and now 2021 COVID-19 pandemic, it's a great way to support your local businesses. So a shout out to Diane H., Philip K., Mike K., Margot C., and Tracy T. You should have received emails from us yesterday with the activation instructions for your gift card. If not, go ahead and reach out to us. They're still valid at the end of today. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and officially get this webinar started and welcome Kathy and Patrick to the floor. So good afternoon to both of you.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Lisa. So Patrick, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a definite close to my heart topic, but let's just start with you. Like, tell us a little bit about your career journey and really how you became an expert on customer advocacy.
Well, thank you, Kathy. I'm excited and honored to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation. When I think of the arc of my career, I've been involved in advocacy in some way, shape, or form for 25 years or so. And I've long been really interested in what influences people's decisions, right? What shapes their perceptions and ultimately their buying behaviors, especially as it relates to business. Over the years, my interest has evolved from what influences big enterprise technology, like the analysts from Gartner and Forrester, to how consumer word of mouth shapes our everyday perceptions and purchasing decisions through social media, to employee advocacy and how it impacts and shapes an organization's employer brand and its ability to attract new talent, to cultivating customers to share their experiences, not only with their peers and their colleagues, but also sharing their experiences with the company so it can continue to improve how it does what it does. And so, I think all of these can be considered under a broader tent of advocacy. And I think a lot of companies struggle with some of these. So I've spent a lot of time over the years working with organizations to shape how they can organize and engineer, if you will, advocacy, because it just doesn't happen, right? Case studies don't just happen, right? It's a result of all of the things that you did right to get you to the point where you have advocates. So I created Seventh Echo after my last company was acquired, which was an employee advocacy platform. I became the chief marketing officer of the new organization, which brought 7 different companies together. And my job was, to figure out how to organize this new offering and take it to market. So I started with listening to customers and to better understand what their needs were and get their guidance about how we could uniquely meet their needs with what we had. I then served as a transitional CMO at a startup where I, along with what I find a lot of people struggle with, and that is to find case studies and testimonials and references, even though we had a lot of happy customers. And this is not a new challenge, right? It's something that I think most companies are challenged with. And what I realized was that I had always been focused on the outcomes of advocacy rather than how to build sustainable advocacy. So throughout all of those experiences, I built a methodology around advocacy, which ultimately led to Seventh Deco and the focus on helping companies create, cultivate, and activate advocates. So I'm thrilled to be here today and really looking forward to a fun conversation.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you broadened the topic to employee advocacy as well. So I think there's definitely some lessons to be learned that could be both part of your growth with customers, but as well with retention and engagement of your staff. It's a huge market issue today. So, well, let's step in. I think where we always like to start is for us, it's how does this topic fit into an organization's best opportunity for growth. And, really to me, this nests well into the organic growth. A lot of times when we start working with an organization, they're really focused on new business. And it's always exciting to add a new logo to your roster and work with a new client. What's less sexy, I think sometimes is the growth of your existing account base. But I mean, those are, your best sources of leveling your top line revenue up. So I'm so excited that you're going to be able to help us better understand why this is such an important focus for businesses and really how it does factor into an organization's overall growth strategy. So let's kind of start at the highest of levels and help us define customer advocacy, because I think there's a lot of thoughts on what this really means.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting as you look at the matrix that are all the grid of all the things that you're talking about, customer advocacy or employee advocacy can fit into nearly all of those things. And, I think that's why why advocacy has become such a focal point for a lot of organizations, right? Because, if you think about where we're at in our moment of time, we really are living in the era of advocacy. And there's been a ton of research that underscores, the potency and the importance of people sharing their stories, right? So there's a lot of research around, 92% of people, trust a recommendation of a friend or trusted source over marketing, right? Customer stories carry more weight because, look, we want to hear from people like us. And in a business setting, you think about customers in business, they want to hear from, if they're thinking about a purchase, they want to hear from people who have been in their shoes and have been trying to resolve problems successfully that they're trying to resolve. And we can think of that in our everyday life, right? Look, who of us hasn't been on Amazon and we look at the reviews? And so, that's just I think that's a microcosm of a larger focus on advocacy, right? Because it impacts what we purchase. So what goes into advocacy, right? What is advocacy, right? That's a good question. And so what I would do is ask all of us on this call right now, just take 5 seconds to think about what advocacy means to you. When you think of customer advocacy in your mind's eye, what does that mean?
Gosh, Lisa, what do you think? Because I go right to, I think it's about people feeling really good about the things that we're doing together when we're collaborating with our clients. They're as excited about where we're at and how we're doing things as we are.
I think when I hear advocacy, I think of the book, The Raving Fan, of someone being so pleased with whatever's happening that they just have to tell someone else about it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's what most people would say. Most people would say people sharing their stories and people making recommendations, and in a business setting, it is references and referrals and case studies and so on and so forth. And all of those are right. But I approach customer advocacy a little bit differently, and I would encourage you to maybe expand on that definition, because the question is, how do you get there, right? How do you get to advocacy? How do you get to customer advocates? And it certainly involves, the outcome involves all the things we've just talked about, but I think it's something larger and more fulsome. And the way I like to think of it is, how is it that we can cultivate and activate customers to help us drive revenue growth, right? What is it that actually goes into making those advocates, right? And then how can we harness that, right, in a way that is useful for them and for us, right? Because this is important, because there's no better or more credible source of truth for your company than your customers. So advocacy is about creating the experiences that lead to customers that are so happy that they will advocate on your behalf. And this is really important. If we go to the next slide, this is really important because it can have a dramatic impact on performance, right? Companies that nurture advocates outperform competitors by 85% in sales growth. They have a higher customer satisfaction rate and significantly reduced churn. And so this is one study out of Harvard, right, that says a 12% growth in customer advocacy leads to a 200% growth in revenue, which, I mean, that's astronomical. That's crazy. So let's think about cutting that in half, right? We lead a 12% increase in advocacy leads to 100% growth in revenue. I mean, you're still doubling your revenue.
Yes.
And there's a lot of, so you can look, it's hard to miss facts if you Google facts about advocacy, right? Advocates are 5 times more valuable, right? Because they spend more and more often. They're more loyal and more profitable than non-advocates, right? It's less expensive to retain customers and advocates than it is to acquire new customers. And so there's a lot of business reasons to focus on customer advocates, because it's not just advocates or advocacy for the sake of advocacy, but rather how is it that we can leverage advocacy to help drive business performance?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for all those things you mentioned, and a lot of times those are really hard things to tangibly measure, especially if you're, like the cost of acquisition of a customer and how that reduces if you're, selling more to somebody that you're already working with. But those are pretty tough metrics to measure. So is there any insight onto, like how that data point, breaks down from that Harvard Business Review, the 200%, where they were figuring just the increase in purchases, or were they really considering all those factors you mentioned?
I think I don't have the figures at hand, but what I can say is that revenue growth comes in a lot of different forms, right? It comes in references and referrals. It comes from organic growth with your current customer base. It comes from direct word of mouth, right? So I think that there are a lot of different metrics that you can assign to or attach to advocacy that can lead to revenue. And I think that it's really, again, I'll say this a lot, it's the perfect consultant answer. It depends. Right? It depends on what programs you have in place, and it depends on your approach to it, and it depends, so it depends on a lot of different things. But I think the point is that, advocacy at one point was this thing of, look, we want people to talk about us. We want we want word of mouth, and that was good enough, right? We could track and we could see that in social media. But now we have the ability to actually tie a direct link between advocacy and outcome, and that's really important to note.
Yeah, I mean, it's critically important to see those social signals of endorsement. I know, for me, that's, it factors into a lot of things I purchase. I do think it's customarily viewed in the B2C space, but I think we're seeing more of it leveraged in B2B. So tell us, we love processes, we love systems. So how do you actually go about creating a scalable advocacy program?
Yeah, I would say in addition to scalable, I would say sustainable as well. And I think that's the $1 million question. And when you think about advocacy, right, as we talked about, a lot of people think about advocacy as word of mouth or case studies or testimonials, voice of the customer stuff, right? But the question is, how do you get there? So much of the work happens before you have somebody shouting from the mountaintop, right? The proverbial mountaintop. So the question is, how do you go about building a foundation to create, cultivate, and identify advocates? And it really starts with listening. So why don't we go to the next slide? And to find advocates, you have to start. It starts with asking questions that reveal a lot about where you're at with your customers, about what it is that you offer, the value that you deliver, and what's emerging, right? What's coming around the corner. And especially now that so many things have changed, right? I mean, in the last 18 months, I think everybody's, I would be surprised. Actually, let's go back one if we could. Yeah, there we go. So I would be surprised if anybody, anybody's business on this call hasn't changed, right? If their needs haven't changed over the last 18 months, right? COVID kind of threw everything into up in the air, right? And everybody's needs and requirements changed, their business realities changed. And so, as you think about the market that you were serving, do you still know it, right? Every company in the world is developed or created because they see an opportunity in a market, right? They know a market, they see an opportunity in a market, and they see a way to fill that. But are those business realities the same, right? Or how have they changed? And it's really important to understand what that is and get insight into how they've changed and guidance on how you can better serve it. And so when I think about that, right, there are two things that are very powerful tools that any company can use. The first is, and why don't we go to the next slide? The first is executive roundtable, and until about a year ago, I would have thought, my definition of executive roundtable was you got a bunch of executives, together to kind of talk about you, right? And it was a little bit of a schmoozy thing, and it was more of a kind of a marketing type thing. But I was in working with a client of mine. We had actually started out to develop a customer advisory board, which I'll talk about in just a second. But as we were looking at the customer advisory board, COVID hit, and it just wasn't the right time to do this. However, what we did do was pull customers together and invite them to really a roundtable to talk about the things that they were facing, right? What challenges are you facing? Because there was no precedent for this, right? And there was no playbook for how organizations were going to approach and manage COVID. And so the opportunity was to invite them together and just create open space for them to talk, right? So facilitate the discussion. Look, you're all our customers, right? You have commonalities, you have common challenges. So let's talk about that. And it wasn't really about Mequilibrium. It was Mequilibrium facilitating the discussion. And the upshot of that was that Mequilibrium, the company, was able to listen in to their customers as they talked about the challenges that they were facing and about the solutions that they were developing, right? And it gave them just such valuable insight into their customers. So again, it wasn't about Mequilibrium, it was about their customers, but Mequilibrium just simply said, hey, come together and we'll facilitate the conversation.
Yeah.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I think, you know, we found an opportunity. It wasn't quite as constructed as, but, you know, working with a lot of manufacturers, early stage of the pandemic, and just being able to share learning across, you know, what these essential workers or these essential businesses were doing to protect their employees and, you know, ensure their workforce was going to be safe. I mean, it was just unbelievable the amount of information that we were able to collect and share amongst a group of people quickly. And it was not really to the benefit of our organization. We just really facilitated that information. And I believe, you know, that really stuck for our customers is, you know, it wasn't a business thing. It was really just trying to be helpful we learned this at one client, you know, how can we give you that information to help you level up so you don't have to figure it out on your own.
And there's great value in that, right? So it may not have been a business thing, but it had business implications and outcomes, right? And so for Mequilibrium, right, we had two groups of companies, and they were largely Fortune companies. There were 6 meetings each. And what this, as I said, what this provided was, you know, this unvarnished direct insight into the minds of what the customers were facing and how they were approaching the solutions to them, which, you know, from a product and a services perspective, I mean, what great primary research, right? But just setting the table and providing that space without trying to sell them, but just saying, hey, let's get together. You guys can talk about it and we'll facilitate it in a structured way. There was great halo benefit to the organization that ultimately, you know, amongst the participants, their net promoter score increased by 30%. Again, this was a passive activity, right, that provided value to their clients, but ultimately also provided value to Mequilibrium.
Yeah, I love that you were able to even measure the impact. That's, you know, really, really impressive.
So, you know, as I talk about, right, setting the table for guidance, I mean, that is literally, you know, setting the table for guidance and helping customers help themselves with a focus on them, right? That's one way of going about getting that insight. If we go to the next slide, you know, a more direct approach is a customer advisory board. And this is, you know, this is similar to a roundtable, right? You're inviting customers in to a discussion, but this is really focused on you as the organization. How is it that you can pull them together to help you get better at what you do? And that's their mandate, right? The mandate of a customer advisory board is to help you improve across all facets of your organization. And, you know, a customer advisory board typically is, you know, consists of between 10 and 15 customers with a mix of profiles, some happy, some maybe not so happy. You know, the customer advisory board really is your customer board of directors, and you want versatility in the perspectives that you're going to receive, right? Because if all you have are happy customers on there, you know, what are you going to learn about the people that aren't happy, right? You already know they're happy. But again, like the roundtable, this is focused on helping you get insight and guidance and direction into how you can improve the customer experience, right? From the sales and marketing perspective, from the product perspective, from implementation, from customer success, right? Across the board, the customer advisory group is tasked with helping you. And so after the same client, following the series of executive roundtables, we did convene a customer advisory board that meets on a quarterly basis. And each of the customer advisory board meetings focuses on a different topic. Right? One meeting will be focused on product and really deep dive into that. One will be focused on their data or support or market trends, right? One of the things that we want from a customer advisory board is to understand what's happening with us, how we can improve what we're doing, but it's also to get guidance and their insight into market trends and what's happened, what they see happening in the market and how their needs are evolving and what their strategy is for the next year so that Equilibrium can evolve to help with that.
Yeah, I mean, I love both these. It kind of comes to mind, how some organizations use like user conferences or things where they're able to get, a lot of collective data. But I have to imagine that there's a little bit of fear, whenever you're like gonna open the kimono and get your customers into a room, has there been any challenges? How do you overcome those types of objectives when you're thinking about setting up something that is going to, put you in a bit of a vulnerable state as an organization?
Sure, there is some of that, and I think the answer to that is, look, you need insight into your customer needs, and asking a customer advisory board to convene to help you get better at what you do. There is an element of fearless listening involved, right? Because who of us likes to hear bad news? Who of us, nobody likes to hear that their baby's ugly. And it's not that, right? It's a productive, constructive conversation with the understanding that, look, you're here to help us get better. We value your voice and we value your expertise. So help us get better. It's not a customer advisory board or these conversations are not it's not an opportunity just to throw mud, right? As a matter of fact, it's not an opportunity to throw mud, right? That's not why we're there. And part of that is the moderation and the setup of it, right? Being very clear on what you want and articulating that to the clients. There's also, oftentimes there's also a concern about, well, what if we, why would the customers do this? Why would they participate, right? What's in it for them? Which is a great question, right? Because what's in it for them is, the WIFM, if you will, is multiple. One is there's no underestimating appeal to ego, right? Everybody loves to be asked for their opinion, and everybody loves to be asked for their help, or most people do rather. So there is that. There's also the opportunity to network with their peers, right? I mean, we all, from a professional standpoint, that is so important for us. And the ability, especially around folks who have common challenges, right? Around a product or a service, the ability to network with your peers is huge. Also, the ability to impact the direction of the product or service, right? To meet, frankly, your own needs is pretty powerful. Right. So there are a number and the WIFMs, the what's in it for me goes on. Right. But I think the point is that the level of fear and uncertainty in convening the cab, I think, can be overcome with understanding what a cab is and what a cab is not. And a lot of it goes into how you structure it. So you see here 5 steps to success. And I think that at the outset, it's really important to understand what it is that you want from the customer advisory board, right? It's not just, we want to get a bunch of customers together to talk, right? That's not it, right? It is, we want customers to help us achieve X, Y, and Z, right? We want to be very deliberate about what it is that we want so that we can set objectives to it, we can put metrics around it, and then we can create a plan. And part of this is, an important note on this is, it's important to involve the entire organization in this, right? Because a customer advisory board is going to touch on the entire organization. It's not a marketing thing, right? It is about giving feedback and guidance on on everything that you do. And so, so it's going to impact the entire organization. So understanding what product wants and needs from a cab, what sales and marketing wants and needs from a cab, what customer success, so on and so forth. You need to understand what they need, how they want the feedback, right? What they're going to do with it. You need to understand all of those things so that one, everybody can get aligned, and then you can create a plan that meets all of those needs. Otherwise, how can you possibly meet the needs of product or CS if you don't have their buy-in?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly just absolutely love these ideas. I think, we do a lot of upfront work and strategy with customer feedback on behalf of our clients, but it's hard to keep that sticky factor. And to your point, it's hard sometimes to even get the good input that really looks at the cross section of how you're delivering, in a lot of different departments. So I mean, you don't know what you don't know, and if you don't ask, you can't improve. And this is just super powerful to me in terms of the outcomes that you can have if you're really co-creating solutions with your customers and employees. I mean, I think that's like the beauty of the whole thing. I love that you tied that thread up around pulling in different people that represent the organization. So it's not just a senior leader hearing this and saying, yeah, the customers say you're not doing a good job. They're getting to participate in these conversations. So, well, thank you. I know we want to switch gears because I know we want to talk a little bit about net promoter scores and the impact those can have beyond just a number. So let's switch gears and like first, just for not everybody is familiar with net promoter scores. So can you just set the table as to what that is, and then you can step into some of the reasons it's so important.
Sure. So net promoter score really is a way to measure an organization's health, right? The health of the business. And very simply, it is, and we've all done this, and we all do it every week, or we're asked to do it every week. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend us? And based on those scores in aggregate, right, you can get a really good understanding of who your advocates are, which are 9 and 10, and who your passives are, but then who your detractors are, which are 7 and below. And so I'll dive a little bit more into NPS in a second about kind of how it goes. But I think even more broadly, it's whether you use NPS or another tool or another approach. I think it's really important to, once you've set the foundation, right, for customer advocacy, you have your roundtables, you have your advisory board, you have your insight and guidance into your product or service, how you're taking that to market, how you're delivering it, how you're supporting it, all of those things, right? And those are improving because you have the guidance and input of your customers. So as you continue to do that, you're going to get more and more happy customers, right? So now that you've built your foundation, how is it that you find your customers? And how is it that you flag your detractors, right? Because there is with one comes the other. And so, so you want to find your advocates to tell your story, but you also want to find flag your detractors because they represent revenue at risk, right? And so, we use the Net Promoter Score as a tool to do this. And when you think about Net Promoter Score, a lot of organizations have NPS. A lot of companies use it, which is great. I'm thrilled to see that. The challenge that a lot of companies have is that they're only looking at the number, right? They're only looking at we're at a 35, or we're at a 10, or we're at a minus 15, or we've grown 5%, all of which is great. But if you're only looking at the number, then you're leaving the lion's share of value, right? All of that juicy, gooey stuff, right? That makes it good. You're leaving that on the table, because while the number is important, what's even more important is finding those advocates, right? So all those folks that have a 9 or a 10, finding them and asking them to be an advocate, right? Activating them, right? Because somebody may be a 9 or 10, and they may love you. Because look, if you're giving somebody a 90%, which is an A or an A plus, then they must really like you. And if they really like you, chances are that they will be a case study or a reference or a testimonial, or they'll share content or whatever it is, right? They'll share their story in some way, shape, or form, which is what you want. And that is great. Because as we talked about, right, there's no more powerful or credible voice than your advocates. What's even more, I think, useful and valuable in the NPS is finding those detractors. Anybody that is a 7 or under. Those are people who, frankly, may not be super thrilled with you, right? Think about it. You're getting a C or less on that, and that represents people that are not happy and maybe open to going somewhere else, and which represents revenue at risk. And so let's put it in context, right? So you have revenue at risk, and you have, let's say you're planning for 2022, and your sales target, your sales growth is 20%. If you have 10% churn, right, 10% customer or revenue churn, you're actually starting out at a deficit, and you actually have to grow 30%, right, your sales to make up for that deficit. So if you can move detractors even 5%, right, then that represents a significant gain in your revenue target, right? You're that much closer to your revenue target. And frankly, there are some detractors that you're just not going to be able to save, right? For whatever reason. But there are a lot of people in the 5 to 7 range that just want to be acknowledged. They want to be heard, or they have a challenge at a moment in time, right? That can be, if you acknowledge them and reach out to them, then they can actually be moved to an advocate. And I've seen this time and again. And if you can actually move a detractor if you can move a customer from detractor to advocate, they'll actually be a much more powerful advocate and far more loyal, because you listened to them and fixed whatever it is that they were challenged with. And so NPS goes far beyond just the number, right? It finds your advocates. It flags revenue at risk. It's an indicator of business health, but it also helps you to understand overall client satisfaction while gaining insight into areas of improvement. Because what you want from your detractors is to address their challenges, but you also want to get their feedback on what they're unhappy with, and then feed that to the rest of the organization where appropriate.
Patrick, can I ask you to just give like a couple of examples of just how do you go about addressing detractors? What are some of the things that you've done or tactics that you've used?
Actually, if you go to the next slide, that's a great segue. Thank you, Kathy.
Oh.
That's a great segue. And so the process really, it's a pretty straightforward process, right? The NPS survey goes out, you get it back, and you evaluate, and you kind of see who's, where folks are. And then it's really important to have a process in place for communicating any detractors, right? So whether that's going to an account rep or a customer service or customer success manager, and having a formal process for them to reach out and just ask the question, right? I see that you responded. I would love to understand kind of what's going on and how we can help. I mean, truly, it is as simple as kind of putting, just charting out a process, and then almost even giving a script to the CS team or whoever it is that's going to be reaching out, giving a script, giving them a little bit of training, help with role playing, but reaching out and getting that feedback. But what's really important is once you get that feedback, you need to channel it to the right department, right? To the right place in the organization, for them to evaluate and determine what they're going to do with it. And sometimes you don't do anything with it, right? And that's okay, right? But then it's important then to close the communication loop, right? The feedback loop with the customers, right? To tell them, look, we heard you. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're doing about it, even if it's nothing. And it doesn't have to be, that sounds daunting, I know, and it doesn't have to be on an individual basis. It could be with more severe, but it could also be on an aggregate, right? So on a monthly or quarterly basis, thanks so much for everybody's feedback. Here's what we heard. Here's what we're doing about it. The key there, though, is to create a process, right, that is inculcated throughout the organization, which, if done, actually represents a step toward becoming a more customer-focused organization, right? Which is what you want. And a customer-focused organization is much more likely to have customer advocates than not.
Yeah, and I think, again, just creating a system for it to be a scalable process. Now, this seems a lot more like of a one-to-one where you're actually physically calling somebody, but it is not as commonplace in B2B, but it's getting more commonplace in B2B, but it's certainly very common in B2C. What if the feedback is on a public domain where what is your recommendation to responding to those types of situations?
Classic consultant answer. It depends. It depends on what the what the comment is, what the feedback is. It depends on what the forum is. However, what you do want to do, what you don't want to do is leave it unresponded to. Right. Oftentimes, what works is thank you so much for your comment. Thank you for your feedback. We would love to learn more. How can we contact you? Right. And so acknowledge it in the public domain and then take it offline.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I 100% agree. Like positive and negative feedback. I even feel like there's an opportunity if you get enough data to ideate gaps in your service offering or product offering to use that information to elevate how you serve customers, not just trying to resurrect a relationship, but how do you create a more valuable offering based on feedback from a number of sources. So thank you, that was really helpful. So it is in terms of impact. I think you're going to talk us through some real meaningful data points around financial impact.
I am, and so before we get to that, why don't we go to the next slide? Because when we think about all right, well, we have created the foundation for customer advocacy, right? We have the guidance and to help us improve how we do what we do. And that has led to happy customers and happy customers that we have identified advocates from. What do we do with them? And one of the challenges that a lot of organizations have is they have happy customers, but you go to ask them for a case study, or you go to ask them for a testimonial, and they're like, "Yeah, I can't do that." And that's a real challenge. That is a real challenge. And so there are ways to, I think, handle that, and I don't want to say get around it, but how to approach it in a way that could yield better results. And if you, Lisa, if you just click on the next, a lot of organizations don't understand what you're really asking for when you're asking for a case study, right, or a testimonial, right? And so make it a win-win, right? If you're asking for something, let them know that there's something in it for them as well. And so call it, so let's take a case study, for example, right? Case studies are often flagged by legal or procurement as a no-go. However, if you approach it not as a case study, but look, we love the work that you've done and the work that we've done together. We would love to do an executive summary on it so that you can merchandise that in, with your team and internally to showcase, the success you've had. And by the way, we would love to show this to customers. We would love to tell your story, right? People, I think, would get a lot out of it, right? It's a rose is a rose, right? But it's all in the approach. So framing it as a what's in it for them, right? What we're wanting to do is showcase, your success, right? Underscore the light lifting. As much as we can take off their plate and make it as turnkey as possible, right? The better, because everybody is busier than ever. And so if we can make it super simple for them to participate, all the better. And just, keep it super simple, right? It doesn't have to be long and drawn out, right? One other thing that I will share before we move on is, one of the biggest challenges that from a sales perspective that a lot of organizations have that touches on marketing are references, right? Because look, every organization needs references, and most prospects want to talk to somebody who, right, has solved a problem similar to theirs successfully, and they want insight into, well, before I write a check, I want to know, right, from somebody who's been there. The challenge with most organizations is that they only have a handful of references, right? 4 or 5 references that are always a go-to for the sales team, right? The sales team always wants to talk to them. And if that's the case, then in all likelihood, those references are going to fatigue, right? They're going to burn out. And that is a real challenge. And one of the ways that that we've been able to address that is to take those references and record them, and create a video reference where you interview a customer around a handful of frequently asked questions, and then you splice that up into smaller segments around why did you choose to start working with Red Caffeine? What impact did they have? What was the best part of working with them? So on and so forth. And if you can go back to your 4 or 5 references and ask those questions, then you have a video library of references that you can point prospects to, and you're not going to burn them out.
I love that idea. Yeah. Because it is very commonplace, I think, for all organizations to kind of go fishing in the same well, and it does, you feel bad. You don't want to keep asking the same people to advocate for you. And I also, the real challenge of getting somebody to endorse you. So making things simple, giving them, some starting points. And then really, I too think, framing what you're looking for from them. So you're getting the right, you're getting the testimonial that you actually really need is also an important factor. So no, some really, really good actionable ideas that I think any business could leverage, as they walk away from today. So tell us a bit more about the finance piece of these outcomes.
Yeah. So one of the challenges that early on I had was quantifying the impact of advocacy, right? And in social media, early social media, it was, we worked with, Unilever and Conagra and Frito-Lay around their social media marketing. And, in presenting to the CMOs, right, what they were getting for their $1 million, return on engagement really wasn't cutting it. And, I bear the scars of those conversations. And so that really ingrained in me this sense for tying advocacy in whatever form, right? Whether that's consumer advocacy through social media and word of mouth, or employee advocacy or customer advocacy, right? So tying a direct link between, your efforts in advocacy to tangible, measurable business outcomes. And so if you look at just NPS, and I'll touch on this, I am happy to go into other details. I know that we're running out of time, but on NPS, right? Say that you are dedicating $50,000 to your NPS program, and that is whether that's tools or that is FTE or that is whatever resources. Breaking down, looking at your total number of customers, and of those, how many are promoters, how many are passes, how many are detractors, and then getting to your net promoter score. And then looking for each of those categories, looking at the annual spend, right? The annual revenue. So if you can, so say that, today you have an NPS of 63 and you focus on increasing that, which means increasing your promoters and decreasing your detractors. And you can see here in the detractors on the 4th row, today we're at 11%. In 6 months, we're at 10%. We've only changed, reduced detractors by 1%, but the NPS went up by 4 points. Everything being equal, that 4-point increase leads to an $185,000 annual revenue increase, right? And your ROI then on your program then is pretty respectable. And so this is certainly an example, but the point here is that there is a way to tie everything that you do in advocacy to measurable and tangible business outcomes.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I appreciate that because, I think we might have heard once or twice that social media wasn't going to have an impact on a client's business. So, I know we're getting close to time, but I'd love to see if there's any questions coming in, Lise.
So one of the questions we had, Patrick, and I think this is probably echoed by other individuals too, but maybe they're not ready to share it. But if I'm a company that's not currently tracking NPS, I'm not doing any advisory boards, do you have like 2 or 3 tips to help me get started? Because this seems a little bit daunting to get going.
I will say this, I understand that it seems daunting and it seems like a lot. I will say this, and I have to remind myself of this every time I am overwhelmed by work. Once I dive in and focus on it, right, everything kind of seems to fall in line. And I would say you don't have to do all of this all at once, right? As a matter of fact, I would encourage you to take one of these initiatives and start it, and then build from there. Starting with, like with everything, start with why you want to do it. What is it that you want to get out of it? Right? At the end of the day, what is it that customer advocacy is going to help you with? And start there. Net Promoter Score is a relatively straightforward thing to do. In its simplest form, you can send out a Survey Monkey with questions to your anonymously to your customers on a scale of 1 to 10. How likely is it that you will recommend us? That's all you have to do. And then a follow-on then could be, if there's anything that we could do to improve, what would it be? Right? That's super simple. And you don't have to do much around that. And then you can build on that. From an executive roundtable or a customer advisory board, I will say that the executive roundtable is also fairly straightforward. It is really a function of identifying 10 customers that you would like to invite around a topic, and scheduling a meeting and starting the conversation with, we're here to talk about this. This is a challenge that you all face, and we'd love to hear how you're focused on it or tackling it. That's it. And then moderate, and then be there for the conversation. It's as simple as that. And look, it's like any good sales conversation. You're just there to listen and to prod as necessary.
No, thank you. And I'm so glad the second question actually we had that came in as I'm watching the time here is actually about the customer advocacy and the executive boards. Knowing we still have the what's in it for them, obviously important for them to be there. Have you ever seen or worked with a company that needed to incentivize people to take part in it? Free lunch, gift cards, anything like that, just to help make sure people felt comfortable sharing their opinion?
The easy answer is no. And I would not encourage incentivizing a customer advisory board. You want customers who are invested in you, to participate. You don't want them there because they're getting a free something. Now, that's not to say that you don't structure it in a way that is fun for them, or they get swag, or it's not to say that at all, but rather, right, the slate of customers that you put together should be customers that or want to have a vested interest in your success.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And looking at our time, Patrick, I'd love to move us to close to keep us in this 1 hour piece. Now, I know there are so many of you out there watching, and I think sometimes just taking in the information, especially with what Patrick has shared to us today, is so powerful that it takes a moment to digest. So if you do think of things after the webinar, or you're watching the recording of it, you can reach out to Patrick. We do have his LinkedIn information as well as his email on the slide. So he is open to hear from you. We ask just put business as unusual in the subject line so that he knows you're coming from the webinar. So Patrick, thank you so much for spending this hour with us today, walking us through this important information when it comes to really helping your company that help us help you by utilizing your customers, harnessing their power, and I think overall just getting them excited even more so than they already are.
Well, thanks for having me, Lisa and Kathy. This has been fun.
Yes, thank you so much, Patrick. We could talk for hours about this topic. It's just so super interesting.
Well, and I know we'll touch on this in just a moment, but as we look ahead to our next Business as Unusual webinar, mark your calendar for November 18th, so just 1 month away. We're going to be talking about human capital trends for 2022 with a dual panel. So we're going to be speaking with Ray Ali, Chief People Officer at Legacy.com, and also Sean Helzel, Vice President of Human Resources at Union Tank Car Company. Now, this combined panel is going to be covering topics such as how to think about your employee experience just as you would your customer experience. So Patrick touched on some of those themes today with us, actually. Thinking of new creative approaches to keeping employees and retaining your talent during this period, now being dubbed the Great Resignation. And then lastly, uncovering opportunities for speed and agility in both recruitment and retention. So really diving deep on the employee experience, which is oh so important as we're hearing about this in the news every single day. So go to our website, register for this. We'll also be live streaming again through Facebook and Zoom, so you can check that out there as well. Now, I mentioned a little bit about Patrick that you get to actually hear from him again. So I'd love, Kathy, for you to share more about our 2022 People Plus People date, which actually will be featuring Patrick as one of our speakers.
Yeah, this is, we've announced a new date for the People Plus People conference. It's January 27th, 2022. And we're really going to take a deep dive on all aspects of sales and marketing. We're going to have Rob Johnson, a former TV personality, help us with presenting effectively on and off screen. We are going to bring in Doug Farron from the National Center for the Middle Market to showcase they'll just have released their report for growth planning in the mid-market for 2022. It'll be hot off the press at our event. And then, really thinking about talent strategy to drive growth. As Lisa mentioned, I think workforce is a challenge for all of our businesses today. So, how can you think about workforce differently to drive your business impact? So super excited. You go to peoplepluspeopleconf.com to register, and we look forward to having a very interactive and engaging program.
I'm excited too, as we launch the new year, to be back in person, meeting all of our friends in new business contexts. These conferences have been so powerful in the past. Talking about customer advocacy, great testimonials coming from this of people who have instantly went back to their business with 20 new things they wanted to implement immediately. So come and learn and enjoy and grow with your fellow attendees. If this was your first Business as Unusual webinar, I hope you enjoyed it. We look forward to having you on in November. So again, mark your calendar for our next session. If you're curious how Red Caffeine and our growth consultancy approach can help you and your business grow to market, reach out to us at connect@redcaffeine.com. So on behalf of Kathy and Patrick, thank you so much for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks so much.